The neighbor I didn't know I had. For a bit of context, I grew up in the middle of Farmland in a large 1800 Victorian home. Given its history, there has always been several shacks and barns that once belonged to the builder of this house. There's a highway that sees maybe 3 cars on it during the night, and directly across from said highway, about 200 feet inward of a cornfield, is a shack that I've always found creepy. As kids, myself and friends would dare each other to go inside and look, which always ended up with us going as a team. Nothing scary was ever found. Maybe a few broken glasses, metal piles, and miscellaneous items. There was no electricity or any sort of a utility that made it homely. Years go by, and the existence of the shack becomes a part of my daily life. However, one particular night, as I was watching TV, I noticed the light going off and on outside of my window. After getting startled, I dismissed it as passing cars, simply more frequent than they typically are. An hour passes, it's nearing midnight, and the light stays on. This time I know for sure it's coming from outside. My family was asleep, but being my pansy 16-year-old self, I needed confirmation. Too bad for me, no one wants to go check it out, so I go alone. I grab my pocket knife and a flashlight, the best I could think of with my shaken thoughts, and take off into the night. As I near the highway, the light turns off, almost making me choke on air, but I had to figure out what the hell was going on. I make it to the entrance of the shack, which has no door, and slowly begin to enter, my flashlight scanning the room for any sign of life. What happened next I'll never forget. 5 feet away from me, there's an old tattered recliner facing away that my father had tossed in there for future disposal. I shine my light on it, because I knew I'd seen it rocking ever so slightly. As I did that, a man stands up from the recliner, saying absolutely nothing. All I could tell was that he was middle-aged and wearing a jacket of sorts. Before I could process what was happening, I was already sprinting across the road and praying he wasn't behind me. It felt like years before I could make it to my door, but as I am about to make it in safely, I decided to look back. He was standing on the road completely still, no words whatsoever. It's been 7 years since then. The shack still stands. The recliner remains in place. My dad never believed me. I wish someone could share the dread I had when I realized the recliner was facing a window, which was directed straight at my house. Let's not meet again. Thanks. How can I get to know you better? The following experience happened to me over the course of 1999 to 2000. I was 13. My dad had taken up a new hobby, local auctions. We lived in the sticks of south central Pennsylvania. The Mason-Dixon line was almost my backyard. The spattering of towns around us were all very small, mostly just huge expanses of farmland, cornfields, and lots of general run-down old barns. There were 2 major auctions locally, Stoner's auction on Sundays, and Werrell's auction on Tuesday evenings. I was going through puberty kind of early, and was very angsty and emotionally dramatic. The previous year, I had my first boyfriend, but his parents didn't approve of our relationship and forbade us from seeing each other. Somehow it worked. The only tie I had to him was that my dad had told me he spotted him at Whirly's one Tuesday night when I wasn't there. From then on, I never missed Whirly's. I always held out hope that I'd see him again. Sadly, I never did. As a teenager, I always had a notebook and a pen on me. I would go places just to write in my journal, not paying attention to anything around me. This habit eventually led me to getting kicked out of my church youth group, but that's another story for another day. Many of the nights, Dad and I would go to Whirly's. My younger sister would come along, and we would run around and play, sometimes going a little too far off from the crowds. She remembers this particular individual I'm about to describe. One night, I noticed an elderly man with very deep, caring eyes. I can still picture his face so clearly. He smiled and winked at me. I guess, in my hormonal confusion, I felt a little bit of thrill at the attention, and maybe the second time, possibly the third time. But one night, I felt someone brush my ass, more than just what you'd expect from someone walking by in close quarters behind you. More of an open hand slide across my butt. I remember I was wearing this ridiculous bikini outfit I had brought at Walmart's. It was silky, and I was getting a lot of compliments from boys when I wore it. The feeling of that hand, totally sliding across the silky fabric of my pants, stands out so clearly in my memory. Another night, I was sitting there writing in my notebook, and he walked by and nudged my pen. It made me mess up what I was writing and look up. He winked at me. There was this really sad look of longing in his eyes. I felt like this was just some weird old guy, no one to be afraid of. There were so many weird old men at these places. As long as they stayed near my dad, it'd be okay. But when he showed up at the other auction, Stoners on Sundays, I was a little shaken. I want to say a little time had passed. I remember I had all fancied up in my awkward glitter makeup and rebellious outfit. I was sitting there writing in my journal next to my little sister when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around and there he was, sitting right behind me. There was an expanse of open seats, and it was very clear he didn't just happen to be sitting there. He had definitely come over just to talk to me. "How can I get to know you better?" he said in a controlled, barely audible voice. At this point, I'm almost positive that I said, "Well, I don't know what you want to know. I'm only 13 years old." Looking back, that makes sense, because after waiting a little while and saying it again, I ignored him and he laughed. Maybe my saying that aloud was enough to make him feel like others would take notice. It really scares me to think about my little sister sitting beside me, hearing all of this. She had absolutely zero awareness of keeping herself safe from strangers, and I told her not to go to the bathroom or anywhere without me that day. That might have been a day he told me his name. Wilmer. I saw Wilmer one more time. It was a Tuesday night. It was in late summer and was so hot. The auction was very packed. My dad had to park the car way off the main area, sort of up in a wooded spot on the property. It was not directly visible in the auction goers. So me, being an annoying brat after begging to go with him, I asked my dad if I could go up to the car. I wanted to listen to my Walkman and drink my Mountain Dew and write. It wasn't as hot where the car was. My dad gave me the keys. I remember sitting in the 1988 Oldsmobile Cutlass Sierra with the windows rolled all the way down. I hadn't seen Wilmer in the crowd, so I wasn't concerned about safety. Suddenly, I heard a knocking through the music on my headphones. I pulled them off quickly. Wilmer was standing right at the window on the driver's side, sticking his head in the window. "Hot enough for ya?" he said, not worried about controlling his voice, as no one was near. I did what made sense, almost on autopilot. I got out of the car as fast as I could. I stood there and yelled, "Hey, why do you keep following me everywhere?" I'm sure my voice was loud enough that someone could have easily heard. He was immediately unnerved. What do you mean, following you? I've been coming to these auctions for years," he said, his voice suddenly back to that quiet monotone. I could not believe he was literally leaning his upper body into the car, and despite being very naive, I knew this was completely inappropriate. I said in a louder voice, "Listen, you're making me feel very uncomfortable, sir. I'm going to get my dad." I didn't move, but I had my dad's huge keyring in my hand. I briefly considered worst-case scenarios and stuck my middle finger into the ring. I could maybe hit him as hard as I could with the keys in my fist. The man started running, not walking at a brisk pace, almost like an elderly man might do. I mean running, down the little embankment. I went to my dad and pulled him aside to tell him what had happened. He told me he'd take care of it, and started looking through the crowd for Wilmer. He was gone. That night I cried and panicked all night long, terrified every time the phone rang or there was a noise outside the house. I figured if he wanted to, he could find where I lived. I stopped going to the auctions, and my dad says he never saw Wilmer again after that night. He wasn't lying either when he said he had been going to these auctions for years. It was odd that he stopped going to both of them so abruptly, but then again, not. Unknown creepy humming guy. Last November, I house-sitted for my friend while she and her mom flew to New Mexico to attend her grandmother's funeral. They needed someone to watch her two cats. I couldn't bring them to my house because my mom absolutely hated animals, so I had to stay at the other place for a couple of days. My friend lived 45 minutes away from my home, and I definitely wasn't going to waste gas going back and forth. The area in which the house is located is a little isolated, well, not too much. There are two houses next to one another, and then about a mile down are two more houses, and so on. It's weird. There was a lot of fields around the area, almost like farmland, except no one uses them. Guess it's just scenery for people to view. So, I'm at the house, and all is well during the daytime, until nighttime comes around. I go to bed around midnight. But at around 1:30 a.m. I wake up to a weird sound. It was a deep, creepy humming noise, and the humming isn't making different tunes. It's a continuous monotone tune. Imagine the Grudge Girl's gurgling sound, but a humming. At first, I think it's a pipe in the wall somewhere, but then after a few moments of listening, I realize it sounds more like a man's voice. I then realize that it's coming from outside. I can't see outside because I have the blinds closed, but I know for sure that it's where it's coming from. The humming goes on for like 30 minutes or more, and I can't gather up the courage to peek through the blinds or call 911. I just cover under my sheets and stare at the window, barely losing eye contact with it. After the humming stops, I hear what sounds like the neighbor's door shutting. I think perhaps he, the neighbor, was outside doing something of importance and decided to hum along. I feel a little at ease knowing it is just a neighbor, but I am still a little shaken, especially since it's late at night and random for a person to work and hum eerily. I'll just calm myself down, to be honest, at that moment. Now, I've never seen the neighbor before. I barely go to my friend's house to hang out for the fact that there is nothing to do around the area. Where I live are shopping malls and Starbucks, every girl's go-to places, so I do not know what he looks like or if he is friendly or not. The next day, I take a little walk in the field to get my exercise, and as I am walking, I check out the neighbor's house and see that all the window blinds are shut with no car in sight. He must be working, I think. Throughout the day, I peek outside the kitchen to see if the neighbor's car is outside, or if there is any sign of life in the house. There's nothing. Nothing even when it's time for bed again. I am peacefully sleeping, when all of a sudden I am awoken by the exact same humming sound. But this time, the sound itself sounds much, much closer, almost like it's right outside my window. I am freaked out again, and think what the hell this guy's doing outside my window. Is he trying to scare me? What is his problem? I just had to sneak to the kitchen window to see if his car is outside, but there is none. The house doesn't have any garages for cars. The house looks the same, as if it was the whole day. I go back to the bedroom to see if the humming is still happening there, and sure enough, it still is. Also, the cats are in the room, and one of them is sitting frozen in his chair with his ears propped up listening, while the other car is making angry, gurgling sounds. You know, like when cats sound when they're about to attack. At this point, I'm getting really scared. I'm thinking about calling the cops, but I'm just too afraid to dial the number. I'm also thinking that I'm being overdramatic and that it isn't a big deal, just a prank or something like that. Yo, I think about texting my friend in New Mexico, but it's late, and I didn't want to bother her, make her worried. She is already going through a lot, I guess. The humming continues, and I'm beginning to get a little irritated. I'm still scared to actually peek outside because I really did not want to see a person standing there or something like that. The only thing I can think of doing is banging on the window or yelling for him to go away before I call the cops. I did that and the humming stops. After minutes pass, I muster up the courage to slightly pull open a blind and peek through. To my luck, no one is there. I am relieved and I finally go back to sleep. I stay inside the next day because I am a little paranoid, and I don't want to run into the creepy neighbor at all. Bedtime comes around, and I surprisingly sleep through the night. On the fourth day, my friend arrives back home. I help her unpack her bags, and we chat about the funeral a little bit. She asks me if the cats behaved and stuff, and I reply yes. I decide to tell her about the scare I had for the 2 nights with a neighbor. The conversation goes something like this. So, what does your neighbor do at nights? What are you talking about? Your creepy neighbor kept humming outside. I swear, it was like right outside your window. He scared the crap out of me. What my friend says next gives me goosebumps. I don't have neighbors. No one has lived in the house next door for months now. So apparently, there was no neighbor after all. And I'm guessing it was some random creepy guy humming the whole time. I got freaked out thinking about it. My friend assumed me that all her other neighbors miles away were kind and weren't people who would do things like that. I didn't know who it was, and I was scared to think what his intentions were. Hopefully it was just a scare. I wish it never happened at all, but I'm glad I'm safe. So, creepy humming guy outside my window. Let's not meet. The House on the River. When I was in my late teens, my friends and I had a hobby of finding and exploring old abandoned farmhouses. There used to be a lot of them out in the country, and we would explore at night, usually without a flashlight or any previous knowledge of what we were getting into. We challenged ourselves to walk in darkness with our eyes adjusted, and the only light we had was the flash of our cameras. We explored probably 25 houses over the span of 5 years, and only had a couple scary experiences. This one was by far the scariest. One night, my friend Dave and I took our girlfriends to our favorite house. It was on the banks of the Merced River in central California farmland, and it was a 10-minute walk down a canal bank to get to it. It was a dilapidated old two-story house and contained no furniture. There was a barn about 100 feet towards the front of the house and some sort of police system across the river, but we never dared to try it. My girlfriend Jessica was apprehensive, but I told her I'd explored this particular house several times and that nobody would bother us. She finally agreed, and we parked the car and enjoyed the nighttime walk down the canal with Dave and his girlfriend Angie. There were no other nearby houses, and very little traffic in the area as well. At the house, we explored a bit before I set up my camera for an interior group shot. I set the camera on the floor and walked back to Dave and the girls and waited for shutter to click. The camera flashed, and I walked back to get the camera when the room lit up briefly. Dave said car, and we quickly moved away from the front windows towards the kitchen. The flash we had seen was from the approaching vehicle. There was another road onto the property that usually had a locked gates. What we didn't know was if they had seen our car at the other entrance around the corner and were looking for us. A old beat-up truck stopped at the barn and idled for a bit. We couldn't see if anyone got out of the truck, and there was no way to walk back down the canal without passing by or walking exposed. The girls were freaking out, and we kept telling them to be still, and the truck would eventually leave. After an agonizing wait, the truck started to move towards the house. I hoped that it was going to use a wide area to turn around, but instead, somebody in the truck turned on handheld spotlight. The living room lit up brightly. As we dug below kitchen counters one room over, a loud, bellowing voice said, "Boys, come out now! Don't make us come in or you'll be sorry!" and identified themselves as cops. We stayed low and did not move. After continuing to identify themselves as cops and threatening us with violence, the truck idled to our side of the house and the kitchen lit up brightly above our heads. I started to lead the group back into the living room on hands and knees. I looked around the corner and saw a man at the window. A passenger had gone out of the truck and was attempting to get onto the damaged porch. I didn't think he saw me, and I quickly moved back and pointed Dave and the girls towards the laundry room at the back of the kitchen. It had a blocked exit, and in another room led us to a back room with an open rear window. Dave jumped up and helped the girls down. After I jumped out, we ran into the darkness towards the river, keeping the house between us and the slowly moving truck. Once in the trees, we ran blindly, stumbling into large depressions in the earth. I don't know how we didn't suffer any injuries. We made it about halfway towards the car when we had to make a run from the tree line. The truck was parked at the back of the house with the headlights facing in. The place was ablaze with light coming out of every downstairs window. We made it to the car and drove the opposite way with the lights off. A couple months later, we drove by and the house was gone and looked like it had been burned down. Sometime after that, a long dead body was discovered in the barn. If I remember correctly, there was a murder conviction over a drug deal gone bad. I'll always wonder if it was the same people that nearly caught us that night.